Hello everyone, greetings from OSMAT, the Center for Ottoman-Malay World Studies at Fatih Sultan Mehmet Vakıf University in Istanbul, Turkey. Today, in collaboration with the Center for Anatolian and East Mediterranean Studies at the University of St. Andrews in the UK, we will talk about one of the most comprehensive projects conducted to research on the relations between the Southeast Asia and the Ottoman Empire, namely Islam, trade, and politics across the Indian Ocean. For this purpose, I would like to call them like this: the architects of this project have joined us in this online program. I will briefly introduce them first, and after that I will give them the floor so that they will tell us about the story of the project, their experiences, and the contribution of this project in the Southeast Asian, Malay world, and Ottoman studies in general. Our first guest is Professor Dr. Andrew Charles Spencer Peacock, one of the co-directors of this project. He is one of the leading scholars in the field of Anatolian and medieval Islamic history. He is the director of the Center for Anatolian and East Mediterranean Studies at the University of St. Andrews in the UK, and also a professor at the Department of History in the same university. Some of its publications are Medieval Islamic Historiography and Political Legitimacy, Early Selçuk History, and the Frontiers of the Ottoman World. Some of its publications were also translated into Turkish, and they are well-known reference sources for the Turkish scholars studying in this field. Welcome, Professor Peacock.
Thank you.
And our second guest is also one of the co-directors in this project, Dr. Annabel Gallop. She is the head of the Southeast Asia section at the British Library and a fellow at the British Academy. She is one of the leading scholars in the field of Malay studies. Her main research interest area is Malay manuscripts, letters, documents, and some other cultural artifacts from the region. She has many published works in this field, but I would like to mention her most recent book and her masterpiece, Malay Seals from the Islamic World of Southeast Asia. Welcome again, Dr. Gallop.
Thank you.
And our third guest is Professor Dr. İsmail Hakkı Kadı, a researcher in this project. He is currently a professor at the Department of History in Istanbul Medeniyet University. His main research interest area is Ottoman-Dutch diplomatic and mercantile relations in different periods and Ottoman Southeast Asian relations. Some of its publications are Ottoman and Dutch merchants in the 18th century, competition and cooperation in Ankara, Izmir, and Amsterdam, the Ottoman Empire and the Kingdom of Siam through the ages, and his recent publication with Professor Peacock, a 2-volume book, Ottoman Southeast Asian Relations, Sources from the Ottoman Archives. I also would like to mention a published chapter, Writing History, the Chinese Embassy to Istanbul, 1849 and 1852, with Professor Peacock and Dr. Gallop in the book Mapping the Chinese Past. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much.
So thank you again for joining us today. We are really honored to have your presence today for this project. And I guess we can start with Professor Peacock, since he is one of the co-directors. And after that, we can continue our webinar. Thank you, Professor, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your warm introduction and organizing this seminar. So I just want to say a little bit about the origins of the project and its aims. So the project originated with funding from the British Academy as a collaboration between two British organizations, the British Institute at Ankara and the Association for Southeast Asian Studies UK, because we realized in conversation that scholars of Southeast Asia were quite aware of the importance of the Ottomans in Southeast Asian history, but they had no access to the documents, as no one really knew Turkish. So there were just a handful of articles without a very strong source base, very limited source base, important articles, but there was clearly an interest on that side in exploring the relationship more. Conversely, scholars of the Ottomans and the Turkish world tended to be fairly unaware of Southeast Asia as a whole. Scholarship on the Middle East sort of tends to stop in the Western Indian Ocean and often doesn't even take account of the existence of Indonesia and Southeast Asia. So one of the main aims of the project was to investigate exactly what documents there were in the Ottoman archives and to bring them to light and to publish them with an English translation, which would make them accessible to a wide range of scholars who didn't have the language skills to deal with Ottoman Turkish. Dr. Kadı took the leading role in exploring the archives, and I think I had originally envisaged that maybe we would have a slim book of maybe sort of 100 pages or so, bringing together everything that we could find in the Ottoman archives about Southeast Asia. I thought this was maybe even optimistic. Maybe we'd be looking at a couple of articles or something like that. As those of you who've seen the resulting volume know, it's 2 large volumes totaling more than 1,000 pages in total. So we were very surprised by just the amount of documentation that there was, and also the range of languages that it's written in. Whilst most of the documents are in Turkish, there are quite a few in Arabic as well. There are a number in Malay and a few in other Southeast Asian languages as well. So this is one of the interesting things where I think we thought it would probably bring to light lots of documentation about the Ottomans from the Ottoman side, but we weren't really expecting the amount of original Southeast Asian documents that we found. And we also collaborated with local colleagues in the region, in particular the International Center for Indian Ocean Studies in Aceh, which hosted our project conference, which resulted in another publication which brought together some more articles looking at different aspects of the relationship in art, literature, as well as politics and economics. So I think that concludes my sort of introductory overview of what the project was trying to do. Perhaps Annabel and İsmail would like to come in and talk about what they think it's contributed from their side.
Okay, Professor, thank you. Maybe we can continue with you, Dr. Gallop, if you would like.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think Andrew has, outlined, exactly what the project set out to do. And because I came into the project at a slightly later stage, I succeeded my colleague, Michael Hitchcock, who was the original co-director from the A.C.S side. Therefore, I don't take, I can't claim any responsibility for the original conception of the project and the planning, but therefore I am in a position to really express my admiration for a particular aspect of the project which you don't often encounter in large research projects, which is really the provision of funding and time for a considerable period of time to the appointment of the postdoctoral fellow to conduct the search for materials in the Ottoman archives in Istanbul relating to Southeast Asia. Now, as Andrew has intimated, this was a gamble. He had no idea what would be found, and so the provision of a fellowship for 2 years to work on this material was really in the hope that material would be found, and in fact what was found, as he's noted, sort of exceeded all our expectations in terms of volume, whilst also, as has been outlined in the books that have been produced, in also both confirming and our understandings of of the periods in which the contact was at its most active in the 16th and the 19th centuries. And then it was also a slight disappointment to find how little material there was in between. But I think the project really gave a focus for everyone all the scholars with an interest in this relationship of between the Ottoman Empire and Southeast Asia. It gave the space and time to work on the materials that could shed light on this relationship. So not just what was discovered in Istanbul, because of course that work was still in progress for much of that time, but really to look creatively at other sources, whether travelogues or within Southeast Asia, where so few archival materials have survived from the kingdoms themselves, but to look with a new eye at, for example, Islamic manuscripts, Quran manuscripts, Sufi manuscripts with silsila, which traced back, which emphasized the Ottoman roots of so much of the spreading of Sufi brotherhoods and tariqat teachings to Southeast Asia. So it was really a wonderful opportunity to bring together all those strands, and each of them cast light on a different aspect of the relationship, historical relationship, whether political or economic or religious or in artistic or in terms of material culture. But I honestly think that the impact is just beginning, because the last published output was this amazing 2-volume book from Brill, which contains not even all, but a selection of the most significant documents with English translations. And that really, those 2 volumes are now a source book, which the hope is will be utilized to take forward further studies on all aspects of this very important and still not completely plumbed relationship. So I think that's what I can say for the moment.
Thank you, Dr. Gallop, for this introductory information about the project. So, Professor Kadı, we can continue with you if you want.
Well, if it depends whether I want or not, well, I can wait a bit more. Thank you very much for this excellent gathering. This is, a project that have swallowed almost 10 years of my life, and it was a kind of isolated endurance for a very long time. So it is a very enjoyable thing that we can share what we have done in this period with a wider public. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Well, I would like to, apologize to Andrew for turning down his expectations for a small booklet. Well, it was not my intention. It was what we in fact encountered in the Ottoman archives. Those who are familiar with Ottoman archives and have an experience in working there will immediately, realize or recognize that Ottomanists normally do not base their research in the Ottoman archives on the digital catalog because of its extensive shortcomings. Normally, you will make an initial research on the digital catalog, and then go into the hard copy catalogs, go into the files, go into the registers, because the digital catalog have plenty of well-known shortcomings. As the aim of this project was to publish the main, more important material, well, I started ordinarily with this digital catalog and realized that even this initial research on the digital catalog rendered so many material that even that material was impossible to manage for publication. So we didn't go further to look into the hard copy catalogs. neither to the files nor into the registers. The initial material that we have been able to access on the basis of this limited digital search was much beyond than one could publish within the confinement of such a project. So we have then, obtained copies of this material and then made a selection of what is, well, we first classified the material on the basis of their topics, on which kind of relations they did shed light on. And then within each group, we try to rate this material on, on the basis of their importance, which should be taken up first. We classified them as A, B, C, but we, on the publication, we couldn't go further than A, Andrew. So that was it. What this project taught me is the importance of international cooperation. In Turkey, we do not have this, base of area studies, and when it comes to Southeast Asia, the experience and the institutional and intellectual accumulation is not sufficient to evaluate the wealth, the importance of the material. This was very apparent when Annabel, interpreted the location of the seal of Mansur Shah on the letter that was written to the Ottoman Sultan in the letter of 1849. I mean, Annabel will probably tell about the details, but this letter was already known by the Ottomans. It had been published before. İlhami Yurdakul, Professor İlhami Yurdakul at Bilecik University now, had previously published this letter, but the significance of the location of this very seal, I mean, the location of the seal doesn't tell much to an Ottomanist. It could be only, revealed by someone who has an experience in these aspects of these documents. And this and many other, aspects, many other things that I encountered in the course of this work told me the importance of international cooperation. I think this is, something that has to be underlined clearly. My initial research, my employment within the confinement of this project was from April 2009. I returned from the Netherlands to Turkey, fresh from my PhD in Leiden. And it was at the end of 2008, and in April 2009, I started the archival work on this project, and my employment continued until 2011, August, I guess, when I was appointed as a lecturer at Istanbul Medeniyet University. But of course, the work on the material didn't end there. We had already finalized most of the translations and transcriptions, but the material had to be, evaluated further. There were plenty of place names and, names of personal names as well that required to be deciphered, put in the correct spellings, etc. So in total, it has taken quite a long time to put my part of the work into a final structure. Probably I have talked too much compared to my counterparts. Maybe later I will continue to add other points as well.
Thank you, Professor Kadı. Actually, there are many more details, but I can understand you. I mean, you are giving so very brief, introductory information about the project, but you told us, Professor Kadı, it took your 10 years, right? If I am right, this project. So it was a really long, and one of the, as I said before, one of the most comprehensive projects on the Ottoman and Southeast Asian relations. So, maybe I can start with some questions. So we can continue like this. For example, if you consider the book From Anatolia to Aceh and your 2-volume recent book, can we consider them the results of this project?
Yes, both are definitely results of the project. So, the one you just held up there, the Anatolia to Aceh book, that is largely based on presentations that were given at the project's final conference in Banda Aceh in 2012. But also, one of the things that the British Academy agreed to do, which was quite unusual, which was to allow us to fund people who aren't British nationals to carry out specific bits of research. So, we were able to sponsor scholars from Indonesia as well as from other countries to focus on aspects of Southeast Asian relations, which were beyond our own concentration on the documents. So, for example, Ali Akbar has a paper there on Ottoman influences in Southeast Asian Qurans and so on. And several of the papers there came about in this way from sort of small side projects that our project funded.
So the other authors, for example, the other authors in the book, they also actively participated in the project, or they just submitted their articles for the book?
They varied. Some of them very actively participated in the long term over the project, and as I say, were given funding by the project to do specific research. Others were people who attended the final conference and contributed to our discussions in that way. They supported their research was supported by their own institutions. So it's a combination of both.
Well, another point maybe that we can make here is that prior to the conference, we did also share the materials with the with those who are going to participate in that conference and who are going to present on specific topics. So the material that we had obtained from the Ottoman Archives and we had already translated were also provided to these scholars, so that they could also include the findings of this initial research in the archives in their conference papers and later in the publication of this edited volume.
Okay. Sure. And Dr. Gallop, actually, I would like to ask something to you, because in this project, so far as I know, there was an exhibition as well. So, yes. You personally and actively participated in the creation of this exhibitions as well?
Yes, that was probably quite an unusual outcome for a British Academy funded research project. There was always a proposal to hold an exhibition in the original planning, but I think what was conceived of was a small exhibition of original artifacts, which maybe might have been held in university or a museum, a small local museum. What we ended up with, which I think had a much greater impact, was a photographic exhibition in the form of a number of panels, 10 different panels, exploring different themes, which were able to utilize and to reproduce some of the most interesting new discoveries from the archives that İsmail had found, but also to set these in context with other artifacts or manuscripts or written sources that illustrated different aspects of the relationship. And so this was it was initially produced as a small traveling photographic exhibition in English, which toured a number of locations within the UK, but it was such a flexible format that we were able, and so much interest was shown in this exhibition, that we were able to produce 2 further complete sets, one in Indonesian, and copies of 2 different sets of this exhibition were sent out. One was sent to Aceh, to our counterparts at the at ICAIOS, the International Center for Aceh and Indian Ocean Studies at Araniri University in Aceh. And the other set was supplied to the Bait al-Quran and Museum Istiqlal in Jakarta, part of the Ministry of Religious Affairs, and it's still on display there in Jakarta. And 2 sets were translated into Turkish, and also they were İsmail was responsible for organizing the exhibitions in Istanbul too. So I think it had quite a big impact and reached a sort of non-traditional, broader than a purely academic university-based audience in that way.
Thank you, Dr. Gallop. The Turkish version was held in Istanbul. I mean, Professor Kadı, so far as I know, by a municipality in Istanbul, or I mean, because yes, I remember such details.
Well, unfortunately, I mean, I'm not that much pleased with the achievements that we have been able to book with regard to the exhibition. I had a friend from my bachelor's degree who was an director at a municipality as a director of cultural affairs, and I was quite optimistic about that he will be able to exhibit these pieces in much different places in Istanbul as well. Well, that remained a bit limited. It was exhibited only in a couple of locations in Istanbul. Despite, as I said, my expectations were a bit beyond that. I mean, this is of course not to say that I'm totally, unhappy with the results, but it could be much better. That aspect of the project could be organized much better.
Okay, thank you, Professor. And Professor Peacock, again, maybe this question can be related to you. In the last book, for example, I would like to talk about it. Maybe there are some other documents not, how to say, existent in the Ottoman archives. There are from some other archival sources. But when we look at the book, I mean, it says that it is, I mean, Ottoman archives. For example, the letter from Brunei King, the Dr. Gallop also wrote some commentary on it. Maybe you can talk about these, I mean, materials as well, because it is something other than from the Ottoman archives.
Sure. I mean, I think that almost everything is from the Ottoman archives. The Brunei letter I'll leave for Annabel to talk about, but I mean, the reason it's there is because it's a letter that was meant to be in the Ottoman archives. It was sent to the Ottomans, but for various reasons, it never actually reached there. Annabel, would you like to perhaps fill in?
Yes. I think that letter was included because it was such a rare example. I mean, if there had been perhaps more things we could have discovered which were not in the Ottoman archives, they might have found their way in as well. But it was such a rare example of something which fitted so much into the model that we had seen in the materials which did arrive in Istanbul, of letters, pleas sent by local Southeast Asian rulers to the Ottoman Sultan as caliph, as Khalifa of the Muslim community worldwide, asking for help, invariably against kafir or colonial oppressors. And this was a very late example. If I remember rightly, it was early 20th century from Brunei. But the other thing is that we had quite a lot of references in the materials that Ismail discovered in the Ottoman archives, referring to pleas that were sent to the Ottoman emperor, which could not be discovered to this day in the Ottoman archives. So, for example, the letter from Sultan Alauddin Mansur Shah of Aceh refers to 4 other letters which were dispatched in the previous decades, and there's no indication of whether they arrived or not. So, in a sense, the Brunei letter would have been a similar one of those lost letters. It was intercepted by the British colonial authorities and seized and sent to the British, and is now in the National Archives at Kew in the UK. So although it's not in the Ottoman archives, it was absolutely part and parcel of the same story, and in fact is quite a useful example of the type of material that was, as Andrew said, was intended for the to arrive in the Ottoman capital, and didn't actually arrive there. So that is why it was included.
Thank you so much for this clarification. Professor Kadı, when it comes to the Ottoman archives, can we say that because before our program started, we also talked about it with Dr. Gallop, is there any other documents maybe not discovered about the relations between the Ottomans and the Southeast Asia in the Ottoman archives? Do you think that?
There is always a possibility. I mean, what we have published is only a small part of what we have in fact copied from the archives, and there is always this possibility to discover additional material from the Ottoman archives, but this is not to say that there will be a high possibility to discover something that would lead to a paradigmatic shift, to put it, a bit,
radically change everything,
Yes, I don't expect it. I mean, additional material, my expectation, my feeling is that the additional material that will be discovered will confirm the pattern that we have already seen, not something that will radically change. I mean, why do I say it is that there was recently a controversy in Indonesia, and Andrew told me that I became very popular because of that controversy. Well, I mean, it was on the basis of very specific questions that Peter Carey had asked me on the by email in connection with Ottomans interaction with specific sultanates in Java. Well, no material was discovered to confirm that kind of interactions. but there is always a possibility that a new additional material will be discovered in the Ottoman archives. But I don't think that, as I said, the new findings will change the established pattern radically. Yes, I mean, let's keep it like that.
Maybe in the same line, I am referring to some specific, cases, but Dr. Gallop also in the blog of British Library shared that image. There is an image of Sultan Ebu Bekir of Johor and a servant, it is called a servant from the Ottoman palace, Khatija and Ruqiyya Hanums. But we also talked about these issues with you, Professor Kadı. There is no material about this or documentation in the Ottoman archives, but there is an image about it. So how can we relate to them? So do you think, for example, can we find something in the future about this relation? There is really, two women were sent from the palace to the Johor palace like this?
Well, that visit of Sultan of Johor is one of the most astonishing or disappointing points in my entire experience with this Ottoman Southeast Asian interactions. As an extension of this project, the Thai Ministry of Foreign Affairs requested to extend our research to Thailand as well, and on the basis of that request, I focused more on the Ottoman-Thai interactions, and these interactions were basically related to the Siamese princes who visited Istanbul. And these visits were both documented in official papers, extensively covered in official papers, as well as by the newspapers. Plenty of material news were also published in the newspapers. While this visit of Sultan of Johor is only mentioned in one of the documents after he went to Europe from Istanbul and visited the embassy, Ottoman embassy in Vienna, to thank for the hospitality he encountered in Istanbul. Well, frankly speaking, I didn't have the opportunity to dig in that direction. Maybe a specific research in that direction will if not in the official papers, in newspapers, will provide some light. It is interesting, and it is important as well, because, well, it seems that if the legend or if what is said is true, all these things are confirmed by family history, because some branches of Alatas family claim to descending from this Ottoman prince, Ottoman woman that married the Sultan in Istanbul and was sent to Johor. And after the Sultan died, it is the story that she married with one of the ancestors of Alatas family and gave birth to children, etc. So it is not something of a minor, importance, but our findings did not shed much light on all this family history, what we know from the family history, let's say, of the Alattas.
But do you think, I mean, if we search further in the Ottoman archives, for example, maybe can we in the future end up with some, I mean, document not discovered by now about this relation?
Probably, but I am more optimistic about the potential that the newspapers would provide.
Newspapers,
because I mean, I have done some initial experiment in the Ottoman archives. Didn't found much, but the newspapers are a bit more difficult, I mean more time consuming, let's say, in that respect. But fortunately there are no new research tools that enables us to do word search in Ottoman periodicals. Maybe these new search tools will make it possible to look whether there will be something more on that aspect.
Understand. Dr. Gallop, would you like to add something specifically on this issue? I mean, the Sultan Abu Bakr of Johor and the two women from the palace of the Ottomans.
Well, I mean, as Ismail says, in some ways the absences in discoveries are as interesting as the presences. Although this is a particularly strange case because it's so relatively recent in the historical memory. I mean, compared to say the 16th or the 15th, 16th or 17th century. So, but I do know from my own work on newspapers and in areas where you do for text which is in English and Romanized, and the extraordinary use of OCR, optical character recognition, which allows word searches. And I've found extraordinary information about the many travels of the Johor royal family in Britain, in the UK, for example, in the 19th century, which can be gleaned from newspapers thanks to word searches. So I agree with Ismail that sort of newspapers are a probably untapped, an unfully tapped resource which could be used, which might well shed a lot more light on this. But to come back to Ismail's point about probably that there might not be real shifts of paradigm in new discoveries, but that was already the case with our project. That when we started the project, it was already known that the Ottomans had a relationship with Aceh in the 16th century through the research of Tony Reed and others, and that there were new approaches in the 19th century. And that is essentially what this whole it started off a 3-year project, but it's gone on for much longer. What it has essentially confirmed that those periods were the main planks of the relationship. There's been a surprising dearth of information in between, but the project has managed to fill in a lot of, and strengthen a lot of the evidence for those two periods. But in terms of the really sort of major shifts in our understanding, there might, I mean, if one's really looking just for like major political links, that's what you might not find. But I do think if you're looking at other aspects of the relationship, for example, I work on manuscripts and on letters and formal diplomatics and seals, and there have been some astonishing insights from the material that has been discovered, particularly because although there, for example, working with Malay letters, of which Malay diplomatic correspondence, of which an enormous amount survives in archives all over the world, in the UK, in the Netherlands, and particularly in Indonesia, in the National Archives of Indonesia. But the correspondence that survives, written in Malay, and Malay was used as the diplomatic language for the whole of Southeast Asia, the correspondence that survives is sort of 95% addressed to European parties, usually in a colonial or imperial context. There's very little intra-Asian correspondence that survives. Maybe that's the small amount of correspondence between Malay rulers and officials and courts with each other. But what was just astonishing in the context of the Ottoman project was to see correspondence from Malay polities to other Islamic polities, and particularly the Ottomans, because this was in a clear sense of acknowledgement of approaching a senior power, and both from a formal diplomatic angle in how the letters were constructed, and this is what Ismail was intimating about my comments on the positioning of the seals. The material that was uncovered in the Ottoman archives gives us insights, and it forms primary evidence of a type simply not ever seen before. We have no other evidence of how a Malay kingdom, even one as prestigious within Southeast Asia as Aceh, would have addressed or corresponded with or dealt with, communicated with another Islamic power regarded as a senior, as a more prestigious power. So these are extraordinary, sort of earth-shattering types of discoveries that arose out of this material. And so this is what I think the value of this project has been. So within certain specific fields, it really has provided absolutely new and groundbreaking evidence.
Thank you, Dr. Gallop. Professor Peacock, would you like to add something? I mean, in particular about this specific case, or I mean, in general about the archives?
Yeah, well, perhaps I should just say a bit more about what you can and can't expect to find to explain some of the absences in the project. So, as Annabel has mentioned, we have this gap for the 17th and 18th centuries where we don't really have, well, we have no documents, I think I can say, that we discovered from the Ottoman archives. And as you mentioned, there's this peculiar absence of anything from Johor. And, in thinking about what you might find in the Ottoman archives, you need to think about what the Ottoman archives actually are. So they're the records of the records of the official dealings of the state. So the fact that we don't find documents doesn't mean that there isn't any kind of relationship going on. All it tells us is that the state, or that the organs of the state, the ministries, the viziers, or so on, aren't involved in it. And this is what we have in the 17th century, for example. So we've got much more evidence for people from the Ottoman lands going to Southeast Asia in the 17th century. We've got quite a few references in different literary sources to the presence of people from Rum in Southeast Asia, both sources from the Middle East and sources from Southeast Asia. But these are chronicles and so on. And the reason is because these are sort of informal relationships based on trade, perhaps based on religion. We know the scholars from Al-Azhar in Cairo, for example, which is in the Ottoman territories at the time, who visit and settle in Aceh in the early 17th century. But, this isn't something which the Ottoman state is interested in or involved in. So this is why there is no record of it in the Ottoman archives. So in a sense, the question of the relationship of Johor in the 19th century to the Ottomans, I mean, is the question of the marriage of this woman something which would have necessarily involved the state? And I think, that is what we need to bear in mind. Also, when we look for documents, we need to think what reasonably are the sort of documents that we might expect to find.
Thank you, Professor. For example, in the book From Anatolia to Aceh, we can see that there are some other archival sources, including the Portuguese and Spanish, if I am not mistaken. So, I mean, do you suggest for the young researchers, or if there are anyone who would like to research further, I mean, some specific sources, archival sources for them? For example, this country sources can be very useful.
I mean, actually, I think that one of the most useful sources, which hasn't really been exploited to the full, would be the Dutch archives, which certainly do have relevant material. The Dutch, especially in the 19th century, are very interested in, you know, what the engagement of the Ottomans in Southeast Asia is. They often, you know, sort of see it as part of a pan-Islamic threat. So I think the Dutch archives would definitely be a promising angle to explore for someone who's interested in that sort of period. And, you know, there may well be more material which refers to the relationship in the Portuguese archives, for example. Although, you know, I'm sure there is more stuff that could be done there. But I also, you know, these documents have their own problems of interpretation as well. So, you know, Portuguese sources often exaggerate the importance of the Ottomans because they're trying to give a message to the King of Portugal and to the authorities back in Portugal that they need more resources, you know, that there are serious threats to their presence in the region and so on. So there's sometimes a tendency to over-egg them. So, you know, just with every document, you can't necessarily read it at face value. You have to read it sensitively and think about what the author of the document is actually trying to do, even when it just seems to be a bureaucratic document.
So we must be selective as well about the resources, the documents.
Yeah, I mean, we need to sort of think critically about why they were written.
Well, I mean, when they talked about Dutch sources, I'm very sorry. I apologize from the student, but there was a student who had copied certain, you know, documents from Leiden University Library, and they were these were copies of the petitions that Achinese prominents and Achinese people were continuously submitting to the Ottoman authorities in Hijaz, you know, in the second half of the 19th century. And the copies of this kind of material were, of course, you know, intercepted by Dutch intelligence network and were copied, or sometimes the originals were taken to sent to the Netherlands. And in this way as well, some pieces, some documents that require to be in Istanbul ended up in the Netherlands, in Leiden University Library, or in another place. Maybe the Turkish government should officially, you know, request them from Dutch authorities right now. But yes, I mean, many other archives of the countries that were acting in the region could be, you know, could provide surprising pieces in that respect. But I wonder. I mean, in line with what Annabel has said about the contribution of the source material from the Ottoman Empire, I in fact wonder Andrew's as well as Annabel's opinion. I think the Ottoman Archives is a kind of material, what I got the feeling in that, and I tried to, you know, put it on paper in 2 articles. One was published in from Anatolia to Aceh, and the other was published in you know, International History Review. The Ottoman material do, in some sense, counter the story or counter the perceptions of the colonial writers about Ottomans' interaction with the region. My opinion is that the Ottoman source material, the documents that we have been able to discover, helps us kind of deconstructing this colonial perception, this colonial notions about Ottomans' interaction with the region. In the article that I published in this from Anatolia and Aceh, I pointed to 3 points. One was the let's say the role attributed to the Hadramis as the voices of Ottoman pan-Islamism in the archipelago. You know, the other point is that this pan-Islamic, you know, plot was something that was organized from Istanbul and enforced and promoted in the region. This kind of perceptions of the colonial period, I think, is something that this material is countering. I try to they put, for instance, this colonial writers emphasize this, you know, religious and ideological aspects of this Ottoman presence and engagement, etc. This is what I tried to counter with the last article in International History Review. I mean, in that sense, I'm really wondering what Andrew and Annabel would say.
Shall I start, perhaps? I mean, I think that this is a very good point, you know, because, I mean, there's this whole spectre of Ottoman involvement in Southeast Asia, which has been was raised, you know, from the late 19th century at least, if not earlier. You know, what are the Ottomans doing? Are they trying to foment holy war? Are they trying to form an anti-Western or a pan-Islamic alliance and so on? And, you know, to date, the Ottoman evidence for what the Ottomans were doing has not been taken into account. So, yeah, I think that Ismail is right. To be able to see the inner workings of the Ottoman state as it considers, for example, how to deal with the question of the First World War in the region, it does shed a new light on it. You know, I mean, you can read plenty of some very recent scholarship which suggests that there is a German-Turkish plot, you know, against the colonial authorities. Well, if you look at the documents in the Ottoman Archives, you can see the Ottoman consul in Batavia complaining desperately in 1915 that, you know, he's the only Ottoman official left in the entire region between China and the Ottoman Empire, and that he hasn't heard anything from Istanbul for months and months, and has no instructions as to what to do, for example. You know, so I think that these sort of documents do shed a new light on aspects of the Ottoman role in the region.
Yes, I mean, I think that one of the most interesting and really new discoveries that came out of the project was because we all know about the long-standing relationship between Aceh and the Ottoman from the 16th century and then picking up again in the 19th century, but was the discovery of the letter from the Sultan of Kedah to the Ottomans in 1824, which was both exceptionally early, the earliest evidence in the 19th century for an appeal from Southeast Asia. And it was also the first ever, evidence of that such an appeal had been issued by Kedah. I mean, there was apparently no response from the Ottomans, but nonetheless, I think that Ismail then used that to argue that the shaping of Ottoman policy was as much determined by in response to interest from Southeast Asia as something to have been imposed unilaterally. And I absolutely think that that was one of the most exciting discoveries in the archives. In terms of where we might find more material, I know it's a very difficult issue, but I really think that the Hijaz and the holy cities, which were under Ottoman rule for 5 centuries, and that is where the majority of Southeast Asian interaction outside the, what Andrew has described as the government to government, the highest levels. If a study of what archival historical sources could be found or accessed, I think that is where we might find some really exciting new information. Thank you.
Sorry. Professor Kadı, would you like to share something?
Yes, I mean, if possible, I would like to share this Kedah letter. We didn't emphasize this discovery. This is probably one of the few, documents that didn't catch the attention of the Ottomanists either. I mean, many other material, I mean, the letters from Aceh were known by Ottomanists. I mean, many of them, but this is the letter from Kedah. This is also not no prior mention of this book. Of this letter. It was written as early as 1824, and it is probably because it was in Arabic. The Ottomanists do not, that much deal with this Arabic material. Yes, I mean, this is the earliest piece from the 19th century that referred to the relations between the Ottoman Empire and the region. And Andrew had underlined one aspect in this letter. It was that it referred to Mehmed Ali Pasha's ships visiting Penang. That is something unusual or unexpected, let's say, from what we expect, what we know from these interactions. Okay, this was what I wanted to share with you.
And perhaps, just one other point to add there in terms of possible places to look for more information. I mean, so as Ismail says, this letter mentions that, there is this regular visits by ships from Egypt, from Mehmed Ali Pasha. So, it's possible there may be further documents in the Egyptian archives, which I don't think anyone has attempted to exploit for the purpose of investigating Ottoman Southeast Asian relations. But, this is one of these cases where you would have to go through an arduous process of getting permission, and it's entirely possible you also might not find anything.
Dr. Gallop, would you like to add something about the digitization of the archives? Because it's really, I mean, makes everything easier for us to research for them.
Yes, well, I mean, in the British Library, we've had quite a major digitization program, which is, I mean, it's almost like a democratization of research, which previously has been limited to people who have enough money and time to travel long distances to come to archives. And through digitization, this material can be made accessible to anyone all over the world. Digitization of archives, I mean, sometimes I think that working in a library is, one has to bear in mind also the difference in archives. When we talk about archives, the sheer volume that you are talking about is quite it's of a different order. And like the kind of research that Ismail did was to sift through archives of something for that looking for something of relevance. So there are also, of course, digitization programs in archives, but they are perhaps rather more difficult to conduct in a way that is useful for everyone because of the sheer volume of material. So, for example, at the British Library, we have managed to digitize all our Malay manuscripts, which is, they're not that many, they're about 120, so they can be accessed all over the world. But to digitize archives, even if it was just this material we pulled out for the project, it's not quite so easily done in archives. In fact, there are not many archives I can think of in the whole world who have successfully managed to open their doors in a way that is really, really useful for researchers. Certainly not the National Archives at Kew, or even in the Netherlands, or certainly not in Indonesia, National Archives, or in Malaysia.
So, I mean, still British archives are still the, I mean, most accessible one among all the others. Even maybe their collection is not, I mean, in compared to the Ottoman archives, I don't know. I mean, for this part of the world, maybe number of the documents are rare, but they are all accessible, right?
At the National Archives, they're in the British National Archives, they're not, no, only a very small portion has been digitized, and it's very much led by national interests. So these tend to be records relating to ancestral history of British peoples, whether it's serving in the records of births and deaths, and so for example, for my own interest in the Malay world, almost nothing that I am interested in has been digitized at the National Archives at Kew. There are certain in the National Archives of Indonesia, there are certain programs, there's a certain amount that has been digitized. I don't know if in Istanbul the Ottoman Prime Ministry Archives, I don't know whether any digitization has been carried out there or not.
Professor Kadı, maybe you can address this.
Ottoman Archives, there have, for a very long period of time, there have been an, work on the Ottoman Archives to digitize the material. This pandemic has really boosted this activity in a very extensive way. Now, I can go into the website of the archive, see less low quality, let's say, copy of the many of the material, and in return for a very small payment, download it to my computer, and material is already digitalized and available. And if it is not digitalized, you can request it, and they will digitalize it in a very short time and provide it to you. So the Ottoman archives have been for a very long time working on this, but in recent time it has really in that respect it has been I mean the opportunities that we have right now in that sense. And it is not, of course, exclusively related to the documents in the Ottoman archives, but periodicals published in Ottoman period or other published material is also another issue. This is mainly outside the Ottoman archives. There was a Japanese Turkish cooperation project to digitalize Hakkı Taruk's collection, that is a newspaper collection, one of the biggest newspaper collection in Istanbul, that had already been digitalized, and many other collections are digitalized. What we now have is this new tools that enables us to do OCR search in this published material. It is still not possible on the documents, handwritten documents. They are now this is in fact the hot development, the recent development in this area.
Thank you, Professor Kadı. Just one of the audiences, I mean, made a comment in the commentary section upon the suggestion of Dr. Gallop about maybe if we can search further in the archives in Hijaz, maybe we can discover something more. And she is saying that maybe we are all, I mean, looking at the wrong place all the time, maybe not at Istanbul, maybe we should look at Hijaz if there are, I mean, available archives. So would you like to add something about this?
I'm not the right person. I mean, I know nothing about what might be available. But just for example, in Aceh history, one of the single most important and dramatic political developments that happened in the 17th century was apparently the arrival of a fatwa from Mecca, from the Sharif of Mecca in 1699, confirming that rule by a female was not acceptable in an Islamic state. And at that time, Aceh had been ruled by a succession of 4 queens of Aceh. And so on receipt of that ruling from Mecca, the queen, the last queen of Aceh, was forced out and her place was taken by a sultan of Hadrami side extraction. So, I mean, it's documentation around these types of developments, both political developments and the sheer volume of religious scholars and people of Southeast Asian origin, the Jawi set who are living and studying for many years in the Hijaz, that one would be interested to find documentation about in the Hijaz. So that's the kind of material we would like to find out more about.
Thank you, Dr. Gallop. Professor Peacock?
Yes, I mean, it's possibly just worth reminding ourselves that, you know, the Ottoman archives are unique in their extent. There's no other archive in the Middle East which can remotely compare to it in terms of the amount of documentation. Generally speaking, the Middle East suffers from a problem of relatively poor preservation of archives for a variety of complex reasons. And there's also the question of accessibility, even when they are there. Having said that, you know, we do know that in libraries in the Hijaz, there are manuscripts today, which survive today, which have a Southeast Asian connection. Some of them were cited in a recent thesis on the famous scholar Ibrahim Qurani from the 17th century, who had a wide circle of Southeast Asian students. So there probably are things to be found, but again, it's hard, you know, if you're looking for a certain sort of document, you need to think carefully about whether this is the sort of archive which is likely to have this sort of document.
Thank you, Professor. I mean, it's been more than 1 hour, so if you would like to add something, we can take them, or we can, I mean, end the program if you would like. So thank you so much for joining us today. This project was really important, and in Turkey as well. I wanted the audience, the scholars, I mean, to know about it more. So you shared us the details, many important details about the project. Thank you so much. Hopefully in the future, maybe they can make more research, deeper research about it on the basis of the findings of this project. Thank you so much, professors. Dr. Gallop, Professor Peacock, Professor İsmail Hakkı. Thank you.
Thank you
very much for inviting us and giving this opportunity.
Thank you.